So this is grading the piping before we turn it to finish. And as you know, I like to grade things no smaller than 1/4 of an inch. If you get much smaller than that, you're creating weak points and things are going to give. So I try really hard not to get too small. So I have a curve going here, and I would clip the curves like you normally do on any garment without cutting your stitching. You don't want to get too close to that. And then of course I will grade out the seams. I like to get in there and sort of snip the top corners of the seams out because that's a real thick spot. Again, you're not going to get too close, so I've taken a little triangle out of there. And I'm going to open this seam up and take some of the thickness out of there too. So again, I'm getting rid of some of this without getting too small. Okay, so that's a bit more flat. I'm also going to get in here and cut out the inside layer of the piping. And this, again, I'm going to take it a little bit shorter than the 1/4 of an inch. Not a lot, but I am trying to grade, and you can see where the fold line is there. So that would take out another layer of thickness if I take out that. Just do part of it here so I can show you. And then I'm just going to do a tester and see, that could be a little less honker. So I might get back in there and take out another little layer. So the idea is that you have some short, some long, but not so short that they're going to pull out. So there, I'm going to pull that out a bit more. I had a cutter describe it to me as mountains. There were different heights of mountains in your grading. So I'm just going to take some more of that seam allowance out at the seam. So once you've done that, you go to the iron and you give this a good press. You want it to be flat on the right side. You don't want to see it rolling. That's extreme, but you don't want to see it rolling. It should be flat. You should see the seaming there. And you want to give those curves a nice press. And so everything inside is going to lay nice and flat too. And you can do what I call stomping with the iron. Tailors like to drop the iron almost onto things, like really give it a hard whack. And some tailors will actually use the wooden tailor's point, and they'll sit that on there and they'll whack things with the tailor's point to try and flatten that up. But you can almost finger press the corset flat. Okay, so give it a press on the iron first, and then what you're going to do is turn that bias, that layer bias that you didn't trim over, and I'll try and I'll pin this and then I'll hold it up for you to see. And again, everything should be nice and flat and tidy. The width of this folding should be consistent. It should be the same inside all the way around the corset. You're aiming for this beautiful couture work, remember? Okay, and so I've just folded that and pinned it in place. Now the end here, there's a couple of ways you could finish, but the easiest is to get in there and cut that little bit of piping out. So, and this is assuming you fit and this is going to work, so you don't need the piping anymore for the gremlins. Okay, and then you can, here, we'll get this done, turn that under. You get a little bit of a corner going on there, but you can turn that under nice and slick. Turn that over, and I'll probably have to trim a bit out later, but this is just for demo. And you've got a finished end on your corset. Again, you can stomp that with the iron and make it nice and flat so there's nothing in there. what you have to watch out for with this top finish is there's going to be a grommet there, or an eyelet. So if you can actually get it a little slimmer, that's probably better, so that you can get the eyelet in there and it's not gonna, the bias is not gonna interfere with any of your eyelet placement. Okay. Oop. Still want to go in. So once you get that all sorted, you're going to baste this in place by hand. If you're in a big hurry, yeah, sure, you could just pin and stitch, but this way you have an opportunity to make sure everything is lovely and even and gorgeous, and then you can go ahead and slip stitch it with a lot of more confidence. Also, when you have a lot of curves like this corset does, you want to make sure that everything's sitting nicely before you start to stitch. And there's nothing wrong with continuing to iron as you work. So then I use just a running stitch to baste my work. And you can come back and slip stitch that end on your corset. Just picked up some errant cord there. There we go. So an anchor stitch to hold it. And then off you go. Now with the basting stitch, if you go all the way through, it's not the end of the world. But when you're going to hand stitch this with the blind stitch or the slip stitch, you're going to only catch the layer of cotillion inside the corset. So I'm just going to baste this in place, and then I can show you how I stitch it. And you can hold this with your fingers and roll it. And that extra presses it. So I'm just going along with my running stitch, holding that in place. And then when I get to the end, I would do an anchor stitch to finish it off. And I would go to the right side and check, make sure nothing's rolling, it's all nice and flat. Yay! And then I could actually start my slip stitch. It's poking out a bit here at the end. You know how to do the blind and the whip stitch, and it depends. I like to sew from this side so that I'm handling as little of the corset as possible, and I can keep the corset on the table. Usually you pipe the top of the corset and then you put the bones in, and then you pipe the bottom of the corset so that you're not dealing with those bones. This style of corset has the little zig tassets which have been done first, so then the bones went in and then I piped. So I'm dealing with a lot of heavy bones here, so it's much easier to put that on the table and sew from this side of things. And it's the same blind stitch that we've looked at before. Bare your thread. And again, you're just trying to catch the cotillion on the inside of the corset. You shouldn't see all kinds of hand stitching on the right side. It should look invisible. So it's, let's see if I can do this in a way you can see. So it's running the needle along the fold and doing a little pickup in the cotillion, giving it a tug. Your stitches are about a centimeter. It depends. If you're going around a really tight curve, then you want to have tighter stitches. Okay, and you're just pulling on it to hold it. You're holding the edge of the corset to keep that nice and flat and keep it from rolling. And your stitches should be consistent distance apart, and the bias should be consistent width. Every once in a while I'll do a little anchor stitch or two to make sure that if anything pops, it's not going to totally undo. So once you're finished, you have a check and look to make sure that you haven't stitched all the way through and that it's not rolling, it's nice and flat, and you can always give it another little bit of a press if that makes you happy. So that's how to finish the piping on the corset. Nice and even, slip stitched, it's pretty.